Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry podcast reading series called Poets Corner, in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. So each month I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Charmaine Papertalk-Green, who will be reading poems and talking with me on the theme of Aboriginal female Indigenous data sovereignty, culture smart data, exploring the relationship between colonisation and Indigenous data sovereignty through her personal stories. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Charmaine is recording from Geraldton in Western Australia. I'd like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging of the Walarmida people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Yamaji peoples, the traditional custodians of the land in Geraldton, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. Now, Charmaine sent to me a number of bio notes, and I decided that I would read the longest one because it's fascinating and because it ties in with her themes today. Charmaine Papertalk-Green is a proud woman of the Yamaji Nation, Midwest Murchison, Western Australia. She was born at Eradu railway siding alongside the Greenhow River, located between Geraldton and Mullawa. She was raised in Mullawa with her large family and many extended relatives. A visual artist, author, poet, storyteller, social science researcher and academic, she shares her cultural knowledge in many different spheres. Charmaine has written 5 books, won several awards, including the prestigious Australian Literary Society Gold Medal, and her poetry is studied as part of primary and school curriculum. Charmaine was awarded the 2022 Magabala Fellowship and 2023 Red Room Poetry Fellowship with her project concept, Older Women Making Talk. Charmaine explored the process of decolonising the Western Cento poetry methodology by working through her poetry written in the past 36 years. In this process, Charmaine took lines from her own selected poems to create a suite of 6 new poems informed by a Yamaji way of knowing and being. Decolonising this fellowship literature experience encompassed a Yamaji holistic approach of understanding that everything is connected and reminding outsiders that everything is connected in the process of poetry creation. The decolonising aspects included privileging Yamaji cultural knowledge, beliefs and values, taking a writing family member on the residency to Bundanon, requesting a welcome to country upon arrival, applying the Cento poetry method using her own poems, and holding the poems together by weaving Yamaji ancestral language, Wajarri and Badimaya, into the new suite of poems. Her research has been published in the fields of clinical yarning, Aboriginal housing, Aboriginal homelessness, and decolonising Australian community development. As a visual artist, her paintings and collages are displayed in exhibitions and museums, and she has contributed to significant Yamaji artistic installations and creations. In 2022, Charmaine completed her PhD, titled Nagatha Wanga, I Talk, Little Yamaji Woman, Big Yamaji Narratives. Her research was a female Aboriginal emotive autoethnography and included art and poetry woven together by yarning and narrative with the purpose of gaining a deeper understanding of Aboriginal identity, relationships with family, Yamaji culture and society in Midwest Western Australia. Through this, Charmaine explored data sovereignty, culture traumatology, silences, evocative objects, examining colonised spaces, including the cultural interface to challenge the nullius concepts controlling and disrupting Aboriginal knowledges. Involved with the Yamaji Art Centre in Geraldton for over 22 years, she is currently their chairperson and has had over 30 years experience in art administration on various art boards in Western Australia and nationally. A highlight was when Charmaine was a speaker at the 2009 First Indigenous Astronomy Symposium in Canberra, and she has contributed to the conceptual design of exhibitions Ilgarijiri, oh, I can't pronounce that, Ilgarijiri, Things Belong to the Sky, and Shared Sky. Charmaine is devoted to serving the community and does this creatively through an evidence-based lens with honesty, humility, courage, and deep strength. Charmaine lives in Geraldton. Charmaine, welcome to Poets Corner.
Thank you very much, and good morning.
Good morning. It's very early where you are. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
You're going to be reading poems today from this book on the theme of Aboriginal female Indigenous data sovereignty, culture smart data, exploring the relationship between colonisation and Indigenous data sovereignty through your personal stories. There's a little bit to unpack in that theme. So I'm going to start by asking for a bit of context. What do you mean by Indigenous data sovereignty and by culture smart data?
First up, Indigenous data sovereignty to me means that we have a right to own, control, and manage our own data. And that could be in the data that I'm concerned about is storytelling and our personal narratives and the way that we are represented in the wider mainstream community. So data sovereignty is all around who owns your data, have a right to tell it and to reclaim it, because historically Aboriginal people have had data taken and have been represented by others in their stories in this country. So it's really important on it, not only on the big picture level, but on the individual level, that we acknowledge and we can claim our data sovereignty rights. Well, culture smart data as part of the data sovereignty continuum is moving away from, when people think data, they think numbers and how you analyze all of that. And a lot of the numbers stuff comes into the kind of the deficit model, where people look at Aboriginal people as a problem and always comparing to the standards they have to meet as the non-Aboriginal standards, so comparing two cultures unfairly. But the culture smart data, in this instance and the context that I use it, applies to traditional language, songs, dance, art, storytelling, family history, and all of those things, the narrative approach that's not captured by mere numbers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you'll be reading poems from your book dedicated to your mother.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce the title of the book, and what does it mean?
The title of the book is Ngana Jungu Yagu. Yagu is mother in our language. It means other things, other places, but in our language, Yagu is mother. Ngana Jungu is something that belongs to me, and so my mother.
Yeah.
That translates into, yeah.
Yeah.
From my grandmother's language, the Wajarri.
As the poems in this book make clear, this is very much your lived experience, your personal stories, particularly the story of you and your mother, and also to some extent of your father. Can you tell us something of your mother, her life, her hardships, her relationship with you, and the legacy she left you?
My mum was born in an era where she was living out on rural Western Australia, and was able to, she was dark enough not to be taken, and was able to stay home with her family. But her mum passed away in when she was about 12, and my grandfather at that time, Ned Papertalk, went and saw the local police, who were in that time in the 1940s were the commissioners of Aboriginal people, as part of this West Australian 1905 Act. Chief protectors, they would report to the chief protector in Perth. And my grandfather went and saw the Mullawall police and wrote a note and said he doesn't want his children, the two smaller daughters, taken away to Moore River or any institution in Perth after their mother had died, and they could stay, requesting they could stay with their older sister, Auntie Jean, and her husband, Uncle Jack, come again, in Mullawa, who were working with, Uncle Jack was working with the railways at the time. My grandmother built up a little bit of a reputation in doing the washing for people and cleaning for people around town. And this included washing the police's clothes as well, I understand. And this may have gone into the favour of this decision to let my mum stay in Mullawa at 12 years old. But prior to that, she was a fringe dweller living in the bush camps around the town side of Mullawa, because in that era, Aboriginal people weren't allowed in town and weren't allowed to live in town, and there's a whole lot of laws controlling what Yamaji people could do. So you didn't have to get taken away to New Norcia or Magumba or any of the other institutionalised places to be under the control of the Western Australian government. They had that control regardless of where you lived. So my mum had a tough time growing up on the outskirts of town in shanties, and with no access to running taps and water, things that people couldn't even imagine, even our generations couldn't even imagine today. They're just so privileged to be able to go and turn a tap on or get a plastic bottle of water out of the fridge. Mum had none of that, and I took a journey of going and mapping and looking at the rock holes and the water holes that they relied on, and the government well, they had to walk 2 kilometres to cart the water back up to where they lived. Times were tough, and food was tough, and their parents had to work hard jobs to keep some food on the table. And Mum did go to school. She only went to primary school, but she left when her mum died, probably a year after, and started her first job as a tray maid up at the Mullawa Hospital before she moved around to some stations as a station maid. But she also came across to Geraldton in 1949 and worked as a serving tea to people in a tea house. I have a copy of her form where the Greek people who owned the tea house had to write and get permission for Mum as a 14-year-old to be able to come across to Geraldton to do that. And it's really strange, and just the era. Like in 1949, there's newspaper clippings in the Geraldton Guardian with community members writing to the editor saying Aboriginal people should not be allowed in the Geraldton CBD and should be kept out of sight. They're not welcome here. But here was my mum, a young woman, serving cups of teas and cakes to non-Aboriginal people in the tea house. That tea house now is a cafe, and I kind of just go in there to get them to serve me tea and cake. It's always a little thing that just creates a bit of fun for me. My mum served lots of people. Now you can serve me, because I always said I would never do that type of work. My mum did enough of that in her lifetime to serve and clean for people. The only cleaning I'm doing is for myself or my children. And my mum had her first husband passed away tragically, and left her with a 6-year-old son. And then Mum met my dad, and my dad left his first wife and married Mum, and with him he brought 5 children. So Mum immediately became mother. We don't use them terms, stepmothers and half brothers and all that sort of stuff. Mum immediately became the second mum to these 5 older siblings of mine, and that was tough for her. And she had 9 children to dad, and 5 of those children she lost in various stages. I think she had a stillborn. She had twins that passed away a day after they were born. There were things happening in Mullawa, and a couple of twins passed away at the same time. And then she had toddlers passed away. So she had this really sad life in that her personal things that she had to maneuver through, but to still bring up the 9 children that she had with her. And so Dad's first children, and then the 4 of us that survived in Mum and Dad's family. And she continued to work up the hospital as a cleaner, and she stayed there for a long time in Mullawa, and things were tough. And in the 70s, she went on the representative Aboriginal rights boards, and I think that's where that instilled a lot of sense in me, and having empathy and compassion for my own people and getting involved on a community level with a community spirit. So to me, my mum was really strong. I would, and my sisters and my family would never experience the upbringing she had. And for that, I'm grateful every day to tell her story, but also for everything that she instilled in me to move forward and navigate in this world that I now live. Yeah.
I mean, what you've said sort of dovetails into my next question, because I in the book there is a sense in the poems of great loss, which and the sadness that your mum had, but there's loss of, for you also, loss of culture and language and connections and family, and then it seems to me of great retrieval and celebration of bonds and generosity and love. Perhaps you could say triumph over that loss. Did you want to speak to that journey?
Yeah, we don't use the word lost. It's quite a deficit way of looking at life, because culture doesn't go anywhere and you don't lose it, but you become alienated, or different aspects of your cultural knowledge becomes fragmented depending on the cultural knowledge holders you have access to. So your culture is always there. It's just a matter of when you make your way back, when you are alienated. And language, for sure. There was the movement where Aboriginal people, under the 1905 Act, and just the whole thing around eugenics and controlling Aboriginal people on entering another culture that they didn't belong to, and most times they weren't welcome at. Now, I'm talking about Western Australia here. I'm talking about the Midwest of Western Australia, because that's the only authority I have to talk about where I come from. And the language was seen as being part of a culture that wasn't real, that didn't belong into this new world, and people were encouraged and made to stop speaking language. And luckily for us, language speakers, some language speakers out on the stations and other parts didn't stop. They kept speaking their language, and we have the beauty of a language centre that's captured those speakers to put it into an orthography and into a book, so that we have access to our own language, our own alphabet. But what had happened is an old generation of us Yamajis aren't fluent language speakers, but we speak more an Aboriginal English that has language words that we do know and phrases woven into the English that we speak. Or the way we say the English is we drop, like for the H, we drop that, and for, we put it where it shouldn't be and doesn't make sense to some people, like for apple, happle, that sort of thing is quite funny. I was doing a recording once about 20 years, no, maybe more, 25 years ago, for a radio station, and they asked me to use proper English. And they made me do a lot of takes on the recording and that. And then I just said, no, this is the way we speak and this is the way I'm going to talk because I don't feel comfortable the other way. And celebration. So in your formative years, I was very lucky to grow up in a large family in Malawa, relatively close to the cultural sites and the bush tucker sites that we were able to go out with our families. And you kind of retain that knowledge as you go, and it doesn't matter where you go, you retain that knowledge as you move through your journey. And when you come back to country, then country reminds you of everything. Country whispers in your ears and says, this is your belonging. This is what your old people taught you. We're still here. That's why we don't use that. We don't describe it as anything being lost.
Well, you'll be happy to know that we're only going to do one recording of this. I'm not going to make you do it over and over.
Oh, no, I'm older now. I'll push back.
Yeah, absolutely. You say in this book that it's also about your journey from a small town teenage daughter, as you put it, stepping outside all the things that you had known in a very sort of small, contained life, if you like, into a life that perhaps you couldn't have imagined. If you reflect on that journey now, as you do throughout the book, what are the most crucial things that you take away from it?
What I take away is that I would not have changed that journey. But what I would have done is, as a teenager and a young person, I would have probably spent more time with the old people and doing more recordings and finding out more cultural knowledge, and especially with my mum. And as a young person, I probably would not have drank so much beer. So still doing all of those things. I think that's about the only thing I would change in my journey is that, but not really much else, because on a journey and on a life journey, you have to pick up everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and weave all that together, because that makes you who you are today. And what that kind of tube spits out at the end, like me sitting here talking to you, is that end result. And would I like to change that where I am now? No, absolutely not. Yeah.
The book, it's interesting in the way that you formatted it. It's comprised of poems, letter extracts from letters that your mother sent to you and your responses to those extracts, and pieces that are variously titled with the appendage "More Than a Yarn." I was wondering, I've read this book a few times now. Was this a book that you simply had to write?
The book was inspired by when I was in high school in Perth. Like I said, my mum only went to primary school, but she was a pretty good writer. She taught herself how to write. Pretty good. I was very impressed with her skills being at that level of education. And we would write each other letters while I was at the hostel. And she loved doing that. I think, sitting at her kitchen table early in the mornings before everyone woke up, demanding things from her, or coming home really tired from the hospital and then having the little brothers and sisters to deal with. We wrote these letters. My letters she handed around. My oldest brother lived in Geraldton, and she handed it became a community letter, so it was lost in that cycle. But her letters she wrote to me, I kept, and I carded them from Perth to Canberra to Brisbane to Port Hedland, back to Geraldton. We're talking a 20-year cycle there. And then I always wanted to do something with those letters, because to me they're more precious than people think. Like the only family heirlooms are diamond rings and jewelry and silverware. So in my instance, it was the paper and the pen, the letter, that gave me a connection still to my mum that I would reread as a teenager in Canberra, and kind of helped me navigate and let me know that my mum's energy went into all of that. She had to sit and think, and she was writing her love and writing her concerns and her fears and everything for me. She wasn't happy that her daughter at 17 decided to move 4,000 miles away to Canberra to take up a traineeship. She couldn't imagine that. My mum never visited me once over there. And it's from those letters that the Nganajungu Yagu was inspired and sprung in. I went to a writers' festival, and I was lucky enough to meet a publisher there. And as you do a little pitch, and I'm not very experienced at that. Well, then I wasn't. Do a little pitch and say, hey, I've got this idea. And that publisher from Cordite Books liked it and encouraged me and said, let's do it. And that's what happened. We spent nearly 2 years, just under 2 years, crafting and editing and going back and forth on getting what I would be happy with. The letters that I used, at first I thought it was just the letters I was going to use in this collection. And going through the journey of reading the letters and rereading them very closely and actually analysing them this time for a different thing, not just for my mum's words to me, for a thing showing the lived experiences of a Yamaji family in the 70s. And what can I say from that? And what I realised is I didn't own the story in those letters. My mum wrote that. Even though she wrote it to me, I had to chop up and take out what mum had written so I didn't upset other family members. So that was, and when I spoke about my dad and wrote about my dad, I particularly took that to the older sibling, a couple of my older sisters, and said, does this sound okay? Is this going to offend someone? I want to write about Dad. Can I write about him in this way? And I'd let them read the drafts. And that was a really interesting process. I know some writers or some people maybe wouldn't be so mindful, but in this day and age, you have to be mindful. That was a whole process using mindfulness and respecting my siblings as well and their places and family members in the letters and in the stories. Yeah.
Well, that segues neatly into my next question, and we'll get on to reading some of this in a minute. But just one last question is, how has this book been received amongst family and friends and community?
Well, the family says, they're proud of me, but I don't think a lot of Yamaji people don't read poetry. And, I have to kind of force them to come along to a poetry reading and say, come along and listen to the words. And it's you got to love poetry. Yeah. And I've been writing since I was a teenager in my school journals. So it was a track I was placed on quite young. For some reason, and I guess the reasons are all revealing themselves now and revealing when books like Nganajungu Yagu come out, and they love it. My family loves it. My friends absolutely love it, and I have a lot of people that do come and talk to me and want to talk about different poems in Nganajungu Yagu. But I think like everyone, you got to like poetry, or you got to actually love it to kind of get into it. Yeah. And storytelling. Yeah.
Well, shall we read something?
Yeah, I think we will. So, when I'm saying more than a yarn, It's just saying, you know, it really is more than a yarn. There's a whole lot of different messages and stories wrapped up in my responses. So I'm writing responses to Mum's little slithers of her long letters up the top, and which were deliberately done in this respect and mindfulness to family. So in that one, my mum says, "Darling Toots," that's my nickname. Good to know that you are happy down there. It pleases Dad and myself to know that you are happy. Every time Dad reads the letters you write, it brings tears to his eyes. Your forever loving mother, Margaret, and a little cross. And my dad was placed in, by his family, he was placed in New Norcia and Magamba. So he was not considered stolen generation, but he certainly was in there from when he was 6 years old, and did all the, received and was exposed to all the trauma those places brought. Now this is about my dad in there. Yagu, when I read Dad's native welfare files, I shed many tears as part of understanding his and working towards healing and telling his story to family, children, grand and great-grandchildren. Yet despite this part of his childhood, Dad always told us he was a proud Badimaya man and proud of his connection to his maternal grandmother's Badimaya culture and country. Nyorn, did he have this in his little red journey suitcase? Did it exist for him? Could it exist for him? Was he stripped of everything? Crying out for his mother, Bibi, 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 from within the cold confines of damp children's prison camps, carrying out the dirty work religious groups wanted child slaves, crying out for his grandmother, Gummy, 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 to comfort her gummy grandson, locked inside, away from his little brothers, locked away hundreds and miles from home. So that one was all around, because I don't talk a lot about my dad, but the intense feelings and what he brought to the family home with the intergenerational trauma was played out through witnessing high substance abuse and family violence in the home. And it took a long time for me to really kind of accept what was going on there and acknowledging where all this came from him as a little child to him as this adult man who hadn't had a chance or wasn't given a chance to deal with his internal trauma. Yeah.
Mm. I just want to come back to what you said about what you mean by more than a yarn. Is it in some way referencing the oral storytelling tradition?
Yeah, it's very narrative based and storytelling in a way of trying to get people to have a look at something beyond the surface and analyze it a little bit more rather than just me telling this yarn. So it's more than that. It belongs to people's lived experiences, my lived experiences, and it belongs to my family's journey as well of an Aboriginal family living in a small wheat belt town of, I think the population was about 600 in the town itself. It's down to 250 now. I visit Mullawa often. And yeah, just getting people to kind of peel that curtain back and have a look beyond what's being offered at the surface level.
Yeah, I mean, it seems almost like it's something that's woven, that you're weaving in not just the story, but a lot of layers to the story. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a fair comment. That's exactly what's going on. Yeah.
What did you have to go through to access your father's native welfare files?
I didn't have to go through much because Mum was still alive, and I got permission I'd had his files for about maybe 20 years before I looked at it, put it down, and then didn't come back to it until I started doing my PhD in autoethnography, and which this is a chapter in that around evocative objects. Then and writing this, and then going back in and wanting to understand stuff. He didn't have his own file. All his stuff was embedded into his. He did have his own file, sorry, but a lot of his stuff as a child was embedded into Pop Green's and my grandmother's native welfare files. So I had to go through those as well.
You write, and you've read today that you shed many tears reading through his files, which is not surprising. Can you tell us what reading those files meant to you when you finally sat down and read them?
You know, like 20 years ago, I was being a young mum and having a lot of other pressures in life. I couldn't kind of give myself to that process the way that I could later down the track, and being more mature and having an understanding of the things that you find in those files and the way that people wrote was not acceptable, but was part of that era of the West Australian government, and just the whole genocide and cruelty around how Aboriginal people had to be treated differently, were treated differently. And a lot of the things that I read for my dad was when he was 10 years old and in Eunosia, he got very, very sick, and he nearly died, and that was in his files. And he reminded, and one of my older sisters said, Dad said never walk on cold cement without socks on. Always cover your feet. And so he told little things. And when he got drunk, he cried a lot. And he just cried. And, I asked him when I was about 13, what's going on, Dad? Why are you crying? And he just looked at me and said, you'll never understand. And so part of that process of coming back and having a good look and analysing was part of trying to understand Dad's journey in some way as his daughter. And that the sadness, I used to be quite angry with my dad. He spoilt me a lot because I survived on the deaths of other children on both sides of me. I was in between 4, and I survived in the early 1960s. And so he was really good. So, I knew this kind man as well. But I also knew this angry man and violent man, and wanted to know what that was all about. And he wasn't prepared to tell me back then as a young girl. But I found out, and that was quite a process of going through. I recall sitting on the plane going to Perth, and all I could do was think about my dad, and I cried all the way down there. Just thinking about all this old process, it was quite traumatic. Then when I got to the university, I rang my sister up and I said, look, this has happened. And I feel really sad that I had this opinion of Dad, but I wasn't armed with the knowledge that I am now to be a lot more understanding to his trauma and how he brought that trauma to me, and to work through that. So it's what I believe now is the native welfare files. No matter how ugly they are, you can always find love for your family in there.
You talked about, the meaning of data sovereignty. Do you feel that apart from filling in gaps and gaining some insight into your father and helping you to understand the man that he became. Reading those files is a kind of reclamation of family taking back what belongs to it.
Well, it is. If you get those files, that's your data sovereignty. Those files belong to the families that those files are about. They don't belong to the West Australian government. That's our data they're writing. They might have used the pens and used them for their field notes, but that's our data, and that helps for us to represent how we want to be represented and to tell our stories. And that's what data sovereignty is about.
Now, this might be a hard question.
Yeah, that's all right.
It's easy, speaking as a white person, right? It's easy to rationalize what took place then as a reflection of the times, as an expression of what we would now regard as misplaced, but which might then have been seen as well-intentioned paternalism. What is your response to that kind of narrative trope?
I don't think it was well-intentioned. I think it was quite a nasty way of breaking down Aboriginal culture into assimilation and fitting into this white Australian policy narrative of everyone belonging to a pan-Australia nation. It was quite strategic, and it was quite cruel on what was done. It was not well-intentioned at all. Children were taken or placed, like my dad, because my dad was very fair. Children were taken without any real reason at all and told a whole lot of lies, that their mums had died, that their family didn't want them. And it's just, if you've got well intentions for a group of people, a community and a family, none of that sort of thing should even enter. But it was a very cruel process. And I believe today the same thing is happening. And we actually have more Aboriginal children in care than we did back then.
You mentioned intergenerational trauma, that what happened to your father's had an enduring legacy, and you've just been talking about how you're much better equipped at understanding it now than you were 20 years ago. Do you feel that you've spent your life working through that, and are you still working through that?
I have spent a lot of time working through that, and I'm not finished yet. There's still things I want to resolve, and still things I want to write about my dad separately, and his journey on, because he was considered a hard man. A lot of people liked him, but he was a shearer as well, so he was this hard drinking shearer with his black singlet on and his big king brown bottle in his hand and cleaning his cutters. So the journey's not over, not when it comes to my family. That before, with a lot of poetry, I was writing about my love for country and protecting the environment. And Ngana Jungu Yagu was a diversion from that, in a way, where it went into my family and it went into intimate parts that I felt were okay to share of my family, but it doesn't touch on the whole story.
No, of course not. There's always. What has poetry been able to do to help you work through that?
Well, I'm a poetry lover, and poetry's allowed me to put pen to paper, and that meant putting emotions and thoughts and stories to paper and probably share it. It's such a scary thing, sharing your personal journey and your personal stories to a wider audience who may not want to read it, who may question you, who may criticize you, all of those things. But at the end of the day, what I learned on this journey was, whatever people's takes on my poetry is, That's their take.
Yeah.
I've got no business to do with that. That's how they interpret stuff. Like, people say to me, oh, what does this poem mean? I said, have a little read and then you tell me what you think it means, because you need to own that. One Writers Festival, I had an audience participant saying, oh, you're making me feel very uncomfortable on the way you're speaking in regards to colonisation and cultural genocide. And I said, sorry. A younger Charmaine might have got all angry and upset about that, but this Charmaine is throwing that ball back at you because I'm not going to catch it. That's you feeling uncomfortable. Go and unpack what that means for you. Don't give it to me.
Mm.
So that's kind of the way I deal with a lot of stuff.
Mm. Good way.
Yeah.
Shall we read another one?
Dear Charmaine, at last I got around to writing to you. It's that long since I've written a letter. I don't know how to write properly. All the kids are well at home. Only Dad is down with the flu. Your loving mother, always. Ngana Jungu Yagu. I don't think the kids are well anymore. Today your grandson said this. I miss Nana Margaret. I always think of her and what it would have been like if she was still here. I would have been with her right now in Mully. Yagu, I don't think the kids are coping here now. I feel like I must tread so lightly, walking on eggs around someone. Yagu, I don't think the kids are well anymore. You worried about all the children in your family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews. There was no nuclear family by your eyes, your ways, a beautiful trait, but oh, a burden, carrying that sometimes heavy tree. I know your favourite saying was, they are my people, and how you would give your daily last in so saying. I understand the feeling that responsibility, obligation and burden now has since you left us. I have sat at court hearings, done police cell welfare checks, did prison visits, had talks with family lawyers, being responsible for underage family lockups, saw magistrates, argued with cops, given bus fares for domestic violence victims, fleeing, brought food so young family could eat, suicide watched young family, organised mental care for family, organised accommodation, organised funerals, seen busted faces of violence, seen family breakdowns from substance, advocated on housing, seen effects of meth, cleaned houses after evictions, moved furniture, lent money that never came back. Family. Yagu, you did this and more. I crouch in your shadow of awesomeness. I coped only with your strong spirit behind me, supporting and giving a strength to deal anything, to life playing me. Many family members are well and getting on, but there are members who aren't. Yagu, I don't think the kids are well anymore and it hurts. It is hurtful. Where does their pain go to when they don't use the help around them or trust leaves? Yeah.
So, is this poem about the intergenerational trauma experienced by your generation and also the next generation, how it continues to unfold?
Coming down from my generation to the next and the next, and seeing all of those things happening and playing out, and then me sitting in the courthouse or trying to understand why family members are suiciding, trying to understand why a young nephew, decides that taking his life was better than being here on this earth. Trying to understand homelessness and the violence that's inflicted on young women and young men in the family, and the normalization of violence, actually, that, you know, this is a norm, this has been normalized over the generations. And even if people don't accept it and find it really hard, but continue to move in that way because of the normalization of it.
Do you think that in some respects it's not simply that it's going on, but that your perspective has shifted over the years because you have seen and experienced a lot since you were young? You have a better understanding of what's going on and a deeper understanding of the, you know, the continuing impact of colonial policies. Is that a fair comment?
My understanding has shifted, but still I understand. I come from a background where things were quite tough, and now, you know, I sit and have a good job and have food on the table and can turn on the aircon when I want, can drive to the beach when I want, put fuel in the car, don't have to put $5 or $10 in to get around. But many of my family members still are on this cycle of some people call it a cycle of disadvantage, but this old intergenerational, this cycle and patterns where life hasn't offered a fair deal for people to be able to work through or even think strong enough to get out of that cycle. And meth is a big thing. I've lost so many beautiful nieces and nephews to this whole substance abuse, this meth abuse, that you have to grieve for people for how they were before to how they are now. And you have to try and understand that.
You say in this poem that you coped only because of your mother's strong spirit behind you. Did you want to say something more about how your mother's spirit manifested in your life?
Well, my mum, I got my mum in me. I've got her DNA.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, like
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, that's like, I got my mum. I'm part of my mum, and I'm that next limb that emerges out of your parents and go along. So they never really do leave you, and their spirit and I guess their blood memory too is embedded in me and handed down across the generations from my grandmother, great grandmother, to my mum. And just watching, the main thing really is all the things that my mum went through. Why do I think that I have to complain about what life puts in front of me when the old people, the older generations, they did the tough stuff? Like, I feel sorry for the younger generation because there's so many stresses and in distractions around now. But our old people had it tough. They starved. They had to put up with things that those kids now or other people who just want to pull up down McDonald's and get a feed, none of those options were available. And that's the kind of spirit I'm talking about. We walk on their shoulders. We are here because of them, and we should honor that always.
Yeah, and so this is what was going to be my next question, which you've already answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it takes it one step further. Do you think that spirit is in your DNA? I was going to ask. Well, you've answered that.
Yeah, of course.
That you inherited it and embodied it in your own life, and that it is something you can and are passing on to the next generation.
Yeah. So I do a lot of I write a lot of grants to community issues to give people. So if there needs to be a dance program, or look at how people could activate the arts and culture more in a town lifestyle, looking at family domestic violence and how to influence men and women to have conversations around what that means. So I'll write a grant And to me, that's influencing people. And sometimes doing all of that stuff and serving on committees is one of the ways I can show love for people, by giving them my energy in this way.
Okay.
Mm.
Would you like to read another?
On that one, I was, talking about citizenship, and like Mum and them all applied for this kind of Australian citizenship, where they said a lot of Aboriginal people applied for it. They said they'd do all these things to get this citizenship and rights the same as anyone else. Such a ridiculous concept.
Yeah,
And
now here first.
yeah, like it's I don't know what those people were thinking back in those times, except for their own egos and arrogance. So it's all about, Mum was really quite strong and in everything that she did, but she still lived in Aboriginal housing. You still lived in Aboriginal housing. You still had records to monitor your life. You still had to go into the blacks only bar. You still lived in the Aboriginal town areas. You still had a native reserve on the outskirts. You still weren't welcome at the movies, and the list goes on. So it looked like a racist bullshit process to be part of a white Australian society when you belong to the First Peoples of this land. Australian apartheid policy and practice is what this all was. Australia must own what it did, write it into history since colonisation, invasion, settlement by colonial boat immigrants. So Mum still had to do all of those things. I grew up with blacks only bar. I lived in the part of the town of Mullawa where only Aboriginal people were. Yeah, she had records to monitor what she was doing and where she was, and because she had all those little kids from Dad's first marriage, she had to have welfare inspections all the time. And the Aboriginal housing, yeah, that's where they went. That's where they were placed, in the dedicated Aboriginal housing houses in Mullawa, and the transition from one section to the other, which all lined up with the assimilation policy, the segregation policy, the White Australia policy, and of course, assimilation used housing as its vehicle, along with education, used housing as its vehicle of trying to get Aboriginal people to be like white people, white standards.
This list is all about exclusion and non-acceptance. And as you point out, being made to feel unwelcome on country, to which your mob was attached long before white colonial settlement. To what extent is this still the case?
It's still very much the case. I'll give an example of the local government does a tourism plan on an Indigenous tourism trail, drive trail, and the campsite, the traditional campsite on the outskirts of town where my mum lived, the Monsignor Hawes would go up there on his horse to try and save people, and built a little altar on the rock formations there. So what had happened is, in the tourism plan, the altar was advertised as the spot, not the traditional site on where people lived. And there are a few examples like that in Geraldton and Mullawa, where another culture's takeover or building on a spot privileges and makes invisible the Aboriginal people on the landscape.
Is there any change? I mean, these are wounds that are carried from generation to generation. Do you feel any healing of these wounds?
Yeah, there are a lot of changes, but there's still a long way to go. If it was before the referendum, I'd probably be a bit more optimistic in saying that change could happen but no, we got the status quo. The Australian population didn't want any sort of change. It doesn't matter how imperfect it was and how many arguments that came about. It showed that they didn't want Aboriginal people making decisions for themselves or under the banner of self-determination on what was right for Aboriginal people. They didn't want that.
I mean, that was going to be my next question. Did I mean that response to that referendum exemplified, if you like, white non-acceptance of the proposed pathway to healing, by Indigenous peoples? So did that reopen wounds?
Here in Geraldton and Mullawar, it reopened wounds, but what it did also was for Aboriginal people to think, well, maybe reconciliation is a load of bullshit. What do they want to reconcile? Is it all the nice little things, the niceties of life, not the truth telling? And people really were reflecting on their position and where to go to now on navigating living in these two worlds or more that we live in. A lot of people, had arguments on it wasn't good. We don't know what the body looks like. It wasn't this, it wasn't that. And it really confused a lot of immigrants and non-settler state, non-Aboriginal people. Whereas really, the people who should have voted on all of that should have been Aboriginal people themselves, having the right to their own self-determination and data sovereignty. And that didn't happen. Reflection and people now looking at, well, how do I navigate now? I'm a good person. I like people. This is the way people were thinking. I'm a good person. I like people, but collectively they're telling me to shut my mouth.
Mm-hmm. Is it hard to see a path forward?
Most of us are already, it's not the first time this has happened. It happens in lots of ways, and people have to struggle and not get accepted. The racism and the institutionalized racism in Western Australia is quite embedded. And so we've had to live our lives navigating that type of thing. And it's just really brought a focus on how do we deal with stuff moving forward. And most of us have pathways already laid out, and we go, well, it's just like a change in government. We've been through so many changes in government. They've changed so many policies. They've taken stuff, and we're still here doing our NAIDOCs, having our celebrations, going out on country, being a community. We just need to move forward a little bit more.
Yeah. All right. I think your next poem actually leads on from that. It's cultural genocide.
There's 4 to that. Now, I really love this the way I put this together and looking at Mum's citizenship right forms and what people had to say. And I thought, well, I want to put my perspective in here now, like in the era that we're in, what we would say. And so the West Australian Native Citizenship Right Regulation Form 2, question 8 was, has the applicant adopted the manner and habits of civilised life? If so, for how long to your knowledge? And I put in a lovely little answer. We have lived a civilised life for over 60,000 years on a land with advanced fire stick farming, traditional knowledge, no ocean plastic floating islands, abundance of foods without plastic wrappings, foot energy, no fuel pollution, seasonal harvesting on land without heavy fertilizers to poison rivers. Question number 9. Does the applicant live according to white standards? My answer was, I'm not sure what white standards are, but our women have cleaned your homes, raised your children, nursed your babies. Our men have cleared our lands for your crops, showed you our fresh water holes, showed you our land according to our standards, and offered you yams and bush foods, all according to our standards. Our people made sure you could survive on our land. So, I really love this one. And question 10, does the applicant or his wife consort with natives? My ancestor. We consort with our people all the time, and that never stopped. We have lookouts to tell if you're coming into our space to fool you. Our families are our greatest treasures. Did you think we would abandon them because you said so? A lot of you consorted with us, and that's why you took our children away, to hide your shame. Question 11. Does the applicant or his wife visit the camps of native relations, or do relatives visit them? My answer. Our mob played cards together, big gambling school camps on hills in Mullawall. They had sing-songs, you might call them corroboree, on the reserve, up the common and other places. They had to visit each other. Cultural obligations. Where do you think people went when kicked out of town at the 6 p.m. curfew? What do you think happened at the Murgu races or the Landor races? Not only horse racing, for the Yamaji attending, sing-song and socialising. So I really liked that little section. I thought it was good.
What led you to investigate the provisions of these regulations?
Reading through those files and, thinking just how ridiculous, small-minded, whoever brought all that up and designed those forms and designed that process and practice. They weren't very smart, were they? It was a tool for the white Australia policy.
Well, I wanted to get a time frame for the regulations because it doesn't say here when they were made. So I thought they might have been dated, over a century ago. So I looked them up, and I found that regulations were made pursuant to the Native Citizenship Rights Act, which was originally assented to in December 1944, with amendments that became operative in 1951, which is not that long ago.
No, it's not long ago at all.
I found, as a former lawyer, I found the tenor of the Act shocking, I have to say, and offensive, and written from a position of condescension, and the regulations reflect that. How do you feel when you read them?
How can you feel knowing that your people were managed and controlled like cattle, and managed and put to the side, having all these little rules based on race? It's racism.
Yeah, and all these assumptions of, if you don't comply with these rules, that there's something wrong.
So you're not really civilized.
Yeah.
You're not real people. If you want to join us, you have to do all of these things.
Yeah.
We now got your country, and this is a new world for you. This is the way forward.
Yeah, you live by our rules, or
you live by our rules, or you're not going to get any of our rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's. I'm just grateful that I don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
I can just be myself. I can walk into any coffee shop. I can get any job I want.
You mentioned in an earlier piece how you read in your family's native welfare files that they had applied for native citizenship rights under this legislation. Was that something that you were not aware of when you were growing up, and until you read about it in the native welfare files?
No, I knew about it. I knew people talking, but people got shame, that they were made to feel shame that they had to use those processes. And you hear about it, but then when you actually see the forms they had to fill out, and then see the actual certificates that were granted and the way it was granted, a lot of things weren't, even marriages. The chief protector of Aboriginal people in Perth would sign off on something, and then a notice would be put up on the Yalgoo police station or whatever to say such and such can get married together, or such and such citizenship application has been approved.
So it was a public thing.
Yeah, it was public. Yeah.
Was this something that you ever spoke about with your parents, their application?
Nah, no. No, my mum and dad were gone by then. By the time I started. Or I might have, I can't remember. People made jokes in the family on they only got it so they can go to the pub and get some alcohol. Like, yeah, it wasn't, the other implication of it all wasn't analysed in the way we do stuff now.
Would you like to read another one?
This is a letter on 1st of November 1979. Dear Charmaine, just writing a short note to say we are okay. Sorry I didn't write sooner. I seem to be on the move all the time, feeling tired and weary. Doctor told me he saw you in a cafe. He was quite thrilled. He told me twice. I'm writing this in a hurry. It's 6:30 a.m. Friday morning, and I have to be at work at 7 a.m. Sending you $5. We'll send more later. Had to pay all bills. We'll close now. Love from us all at home. Thinking of you always, your loving mother. Yangu. I totally loved the short notes and letters. It was this contact between us that gave me the boost to remain on track. I don't think I really understood that until now. I added all your letters and notes to my Thugger RJS Red Journey suitcase to empower me, carried like the water of life. I love that I can read your letters and look at your handwriting and think to myself, my mum wrote that. I'm sitting here sipping my cup of tea, thinking about all the work you had to do to survive. You started so young. So yes, I understand your tiredness. A lot of the younger generation don't know that type of hard work or the sacrifices your generation made. Life was tough, eh? I totally appreciate everything you did for us. I now know that things back home were tougher than you let on. Last year I saw some files documenting your stress and health conditions back then. At that time I felt sad and regretful that I had to leave Mullawar, but I was just a kid trying to find my way in the big world. And I know you pushed me towards a better life. That life took a long time coming, but it is kind of here now. I'm in my mid-50s and my life is okay for me. I need to say, Mum, that for many years I carried guilt about leaving my younger siblings, like I had deserted them. And in recent years, a couple of them have said they felt that I did desert and abandon them. That was hard to take. Resentment towards me is not something of my making, nor of theirs. It has taken many years to resolve these feelings, and I'm still working on the impact of leaving my younger siblings. Siblings fight, but in our arts there is no hate, only family love. I remember seeing Doctor in a Barrack Street cafe in Perth on the weekend when I was in the CBD, strolling about as teenage girls do. Our meeting was a pleasant surprise for both of us, and we had a good old yarn. He was a good doctor and had a way with the Yamaji community. I don't know what the doctors are like in Mullawar now, but you will be sad to know the whole hospital is being demolished for some new health service building. There are mixed feelings in the community, understandable with all the memories of birth, death, working ladies, and of course your last home after you had the stroke. I know I will be very sad when it's demolished. Many changes from your days. Even though there's no meat-safe ward for Yamaji, only at the back of the hospital, the memories still remain with some of us. Thugger RJS, carried like water of life. sustaining the spiritual and cultural needs, and protection like a young mother carrying her baby in the thugger on country.
I was saying it's clear that your mother's letters and notes were a form of sustenance for you. Did they have something to do with you becoming a writer and wanting to chronicle your experiences?
They're definitely part of this journey, but like I said, I was writing in my school journal.
Well, how did you find your way to poetry, Charmaine?
I was writing poems in my school journal, and it continued on from there. I just write. I love poems. They are these. They can be these short bursts of energy and meaning. That maybe lazy people don't have to read a novel and can read the poem instead. You know, some things like that. I had little. Do you remember those little diaries with a little lock?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have those as a teenager and was always finding places to hide it. But in a house full of people, you know, it was really hard. My sister said that my grandmother on my dad's side gave us a whole lot of old encyclopedias, and we would be always going through that. And Dad, being in New Norcia, always had this idea that education is the only way to go if we were going to kind of make it in the white man's world, as he would put it.
Mm.
And I don't know, it's just always been there with me as a young person. And maybe I picked up the pen and started writing my feelings down in order to get them out and not bottle them up.
But how did you get exposed to poetry in the first place?
Outside of Mullawall, in school, I was exposed to. She was called Kath Walker then.
Wajarri Nanagal.
Wajarri Nanagal, and I find that as a 15, 16-year-old, I was kind of analysing her poems and writing about that, and writing little responses to it too. So in my school diary, I'd say in education is more where I was first exposed, and then I kind of liked poetry and just slowly went from there on wanting to. I don't know. It's just there's no clear pathway I can give you.
This book is infused with the way that your mother's letters have spoken to you, not just when they were written, but over the course of your life, as thread, as connection to her and to your younger self and all that you left behind. The poems speak clearly about this, but I wanted to ask you if there's anything you want to add to what the poems say about what your mother's letters mean to you.
I do worry about what's going to happen to the letters when I leave. I've got two sons, and I'm looking at whether I should actually talk to my family and just get them the letters in their whole form published. So I do wonder how I'm going to archive them somewhere.
I get a sense throughout this book that the letters are like an entry point for you, and that there is a kind of continuous, almost archaeological excavation to uncover the past. How does that dovetail into the objectives of your writing?
You know, like I said about owning our own data, and culture smart data at that, is we have a right to represent ourselves, and we have a right to tell our own stories, not someone else to tell them for us. And all of this whole process tells the story of me, where I come from, and of my family. It gives a little snapshot into the life of my family as an Aboriginal family in Mullawall in the 1970s and 80s, and then going back to the 40s and 50s for mum and dad's kind of childhood. it's very good tools for doing that and reclaiming the right to do what we want to do with those files, and the right to write how we want to write our family and our stories, and making it visible. There's not a lot of, that visibility where people were made invisible after colonization, settlement, invasion. Stories were made invisible. I mean, you would see a good example of this is colonial landscape paintings, where you would see maybe some Aboriginal people on the lake or sitting around a fire, little figures, but there would never be any talk about that. They're placed in the landscape, but they're not talked about. It was more a colonial story. So all that invisibility, strategies and processes that came with the colonizers, we can do this. We can get our stories back, and we have a right to. And this was my way of doing that.
Do you see your writing moving in different directions, or continuing to explore what you've been exploring?
Yeah, I think, like that's continuing to explore what I've been writing, because a lot of what I've been writing is how Aboriginal people have to live in a westernized space, and how we navigate that space, and what are some of the responses that have come out of we have no choice. I wish there was a choice where people could go into nice areas, not being put right out in the bush in arid places with no water land, but to be given nice land to be able to live together in that village type style of the past, the way our people do. But that's just dreaming. What we are is we're in colonial towns, and we've learnt and we know how to navigate those towns very well. And that's the sort of thing I write about.
Okay. You want to read us another poem, Charmaine?
Dear Charmaine, I'm proud of you. That's why I'm sitting here crying, letting it all out. Ring MW9 and ask for me to ring you. Can tell you more news, but excited about you. It's beautiful, something to experience. Don't be afraid of the big jet. Have courage. My mind is with you. First time on the plane. Love you always, mother. Love, mum and dad. So that was when I took my first flight out of school and going for my job interview at the Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies in Canberra. Yana Jogu Yagu. It's been over 39 years since I boarded that first flight east to Canberra, and I don't remember it. Since Yagu, I've flown a fair bit across Australia and internationally, and I still don't enjoy flying, but living in regional Western Australia means this is the quickest way. Every time I fly, I think of your words and that you're always watching over me. One of my favourite memories flying into Geraldton in the 70s and 80s was the sight of Charlie and all his little kids waiting for me at the terminal, seeing their smiling and welcoming faces. That is not possible anymore at the current airport with all the barriers and fences. Yago, you were right. Flying was something to experience. It took me to places I never thought I would go. I saw the beauty of New Zealand's worm caves, thermal pools, and green lands. I flew over snow peaks between Calgary and Vancouver. I'd never seen anything like that. I ate fine chocolates, touched snowflakes, and spoke in the European Union in cold Brussels with Sister Barbara. I flew straight across the Indian Ocean to South Africa and ate the most delicious tripe in Soweto. Above Uluru with its reds and purples reminded me of a beating heart and the love of my people and country. Venice, a movie set travelling the Grand Canal with the gondolas gliding by, living in a 500-year-old apartment and baking damper bread to share. In Manchester, I tasted my first Scottish lobster, although I still prefer the Geraldton crayfish. On a flight to Abu Dhabi, I watched the longest sunsets I have ever seen in my life. Like you, it lasted forever. Yagu, it has all been something to experience indeed.
I mean, has writing this book been an opportunity for you to say things to your mother that perhaps you didn't say to her when she was alive?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And still having those little conversations, believing that, she was standing behind me and having a look at what I read, and some of the stuff she'll be thinking, oh, silly girl, but I'm of a different generation and different era, and came from my mother and my father and my old people. But here we are sitting in and navigating a world that still doesn't trust Aboriginal people, or still doesn't accept Aboriginal people, or still doesn't want to do the truth telling. But here we are. We still exist.
And this is a conversation that's continuing, right?
It won't stop, not in my lifetime. I'm hoping the younger generations, and I do watch the more prominent younger generations and the conversation they seem to be having. And, it's clear the assimilation policy didn't work in the intended way of absorption into a whole big one nation, Australia. I really love that about a lot of young people. They still stand up for our rights.
And they're recovering language where they can, and
they're doing all sorts of things that would not have been available with Zooms, with drones, with film. Some of the films, it's incredible. Films, performances, plays, art exhibitions. It's just so much positive stuff to just make you feel really proud despite everything else.
Not to mention that cohort of young poets coming up that are incredible.
There's lots of young poets coming up. And while they might write a little bit differently, at their heart, they still got that love for their country and people, even if some of them are finding it.
We have one more poem, I think.
And this one is really honouring my mum and all the women in my life. And it's called We Can, We Do, We Will. We can stand at our ground because of her, a silhouette symbol of beautiful resistance, resilience. Shells wrapped regally around her neck, eyes looking deep into the generations, a reminder of women's strength drawn from a long line of female ancestors. Truganini, elegant stance of survival and remembrance, for there will be no forgetting or erasure of such strength and existence. We can raise our voices because of her, like a southern clap of thunder shooting between the earth world and the sky world, demanding visibility, presence, and words, lifting the veils of oppression to reveal voices from Earth Mother and her wombs raging. Ururu Nunukul pen was a bush broom, willy sweeping words and energy across country, preparing for literature warriors to come. Because of her, we can maintain our faith in hope, creating a just and better society for our peoples, fighting for Indigenous rights and setting the path for the 1967 referendum with a gentle smile, a fire in the belly beacon against injustices. Faith Bandler showed us people power can turn a country's vote into an affirmative. Activism can walk towards social change. Long line women energies, holding Indigenous women's universe, power, strength, struggles, fights and wins, maternal ancestors, family and friends, at the campsite, kitchen and meeting rooms, a gallery, a stage, a sports field, a studio, a home, holding us tight and holding us up so we can hold our families and tackle hurdles. We don't give up, and it is because they didn't.
And you said earlier that you stand on the shoulders of those that went before you.
Yeah.
You see this poem as a kind of personal manifesto onwards?
Well, those people that I wrote about, I just so moved, and like they're long gone now, and so moved by just their presence that was on this earth to show the strength of Aboriginal women. Resilience is a really tricky word to use when people expect us to be resilient against a colonial society. But there is still an element of resilience on navigating through sometimes what I just think is a messy colonial landscape to where we are now. And then just thinking of women everywhere, just everywhere, and just amazing and powerful things that our women are doing. And we all come from somewhere, and there's someone that has inspired us on our journeys, and that's kind of the tribute from this poem.
Yeah. I mean, I found it such an affirming, positive poem. It's proclaiming, we're still here.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah,
still
that's
here.
right.
We're still raising our voices, as others have done before us. We're not going anywhere. And you stand amongst these women, as in a line of them becoming one of them for the next generation, right? So you carry on the torch.
And that's what intergenerational strength is. We talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, but the strength that people who may not be related to other people, they can still pass on that strength to the next generation through their actions in this world.
You've just mentioned the strength that you draw from, maternal ancestors, about the ongoing struggle about never giving up. What are the most crucial lessons you have taken from the example of these women?
That we can do whatever we want to do. We can achieve our dreams, whatever they may be, and that we can navigate and find where our journeys will take us. And that we don't have to be silenced, and we don't have to be invisible. And these are some of the strengths that that I've taken through life. You look at these older people in such times of adversity and the things that they have achieved. It should not be impossible in the lifetime we live in this era.
So does it give you hope for the future? Are you hopeful?
Yeah, I am. I am hopeful. I'm saddened by the lack of understanding by the wider Australians. But like I tell my students is they need to blame the West Australian government, who wouldn't put our history in the curriculum and aspects of our culture, which means that generations have not had the opportunity to experience our beautiful and rich culture. And the West Australian government did that. And that's where the ignorance of a lot of Australians, immigrants, whoever's walking this country, that's where their ignorance is fed. And they can change that. There's a lot of good people out there working towards giving people knowledge and exposure and experience to rich Aboriginal cultures.
We have one final piece, another yarn, or more than a yarn.
So this one was about, you see these little memes, and it's not about that, but I'm just trying to give an example where people say, "Oh, don't look back there, you're not going that way." Yeah. And I just think, oh, that's a load of crap. We always look back if you've been brought up in our way, in an Aboriginal way of thinking, our worldview, we always look back. I always look back because my ancestors lived back there, and I was taught not to turn away from where I came from, where I belong. I've learnt that many Aboriginal children were taken from their families, communities, and cultures. and so I should not take or keep anything for granted. That's kind of what I wanted to end off with, that one, because it comes to mindfulness, it comes to honouring our ancestors, and it comes to always looking back and believing in the circle of life where there is no end or no beginning. Everything is connected, and that's how we prepare for our journey. One of the things I was noticing, and I guess one of the things I was getting angry about, because you still get you can understand files, colonial records, but you still can have all the emotions that go with that. You still can get angry, sad, cry. And one of the things which I thought was quite a violent act was the stamping of the forms when they wrote something. And, just thinking of that stamping just crushing down onto that piece of paper, and people are asserting their right to manage and control people, and seeing these in the files of my grandparents and my parents. And I just thought that is such a violent act of actually asserting a racist structure on people. The government energy used to try and stamp Yamaji into the ground. Hey, we survived to read them. I've heard yarns that the Department of Native Welfare Geraldton branch closed. Most files there were destroyed. It is said that the departmental records and files were placed in a heap and burnt. I believe this possible. With the abrupt closure of ATSIC Geraldton, a skip bin was brought in to dispose of things. I was there at the time. I also heard that some of the Department of Native Welfare employees took files and documents and still have them. I don't know how I feel about this, especially if they're reading files not belonging to them or their families. But I thank them for salvaging documents and records. But if these yarns are true, they must hand records back to some safekeeping place for the other families to access and own. Data sovereignty means we should possess, access, and own our data, and this includes native welfare files. And the little images that I have of the stamping our people, racist foot down, our culture, our people, yeah, that's it, our people are trying to keep us, the downtrodden. Stamp Yamaji out, stamp out a race. First people get stamping in assimilation. Stamp Yamaji blood into soil. Biological warfare terrorism. Breeding out the black when culture isn't skin. That's the one. They are from my family's files, those stamps, and that was the 3 types that were kind of repeatedly. And I was just imagining this desert. Those stamps, they had little metal ones, whether they had those and just going bang on the files.
I don't know if they're like the passport stamps, they just bang.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. Wonder if they had them then, or life wasn't that fancy and they just had the rubber stamps. But this whole violent action of stamping files and stamping people into the ground.
It's almost branding, isn't it?
It is. And branding those files in that way.
Yeah, I tried to imagine what it must be like to read something like a native welfare file, and my imagination fails me because obviously I haven't had that experience. How much did you learn that you didn't already know from those files?
Well, Mum told me a lot of good stories, and what I read in the files reinforced those stories. What I read, like for her mother's siblings and their movement across country, reinforced that. The files actually reinforced the oral history my mum handed down to me. I thought it was great.
But did you feel that the files were riddled with errors or misunderstandings or false cultural assumptions?
Yeah, I said that. I did a section in my research around the use of aliases, where my grandmother's name or the surname, my grandfather's surname, Papertalk, would be Paper Doc or Paper Dog, or I like that. I said, oh, I'm going to be a little paper dog, and I found that, some people might get offended, but I just thought, oh, great, I'm the paper dog. And so all of these names and alias actually dependent on where people were, because white people can control and manage Aboriginal people, and depending on which station they were at working and living, that station owner would give them a different name. And this would cause confusion with a lot of Aboriginal people, especially in the native title era, where one person could have 4 names, but they're arguing that they're 2 different people, not understanding this process of racism and power over people to give them names on what you want to give them, except their traditional name. So that made it really clear for me on a lot of things as well. And seeing a lot of people that my family were close to back in that era, that because of native title now they absolutely don't talk to each other. It's very interesting watching how that's played out.
There is a circularity in your reading today, because you finish it on the first page of the book, looking back to your ancestors, which
I read that.
presages a book that is concerned with looking back. I've probably asked this in different ways, but when you look back, does it help you to look forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when you look back, it strengthens your cultural identity and your family's journey, your belonging, where you'd come from. See, I'm not a poet. That I only grew up in Aboriginal ways. I do have white ancestors, but I don't know them. I don't know them culturally. I never lived with them. I don't know anything about that. So I don't privilege them in any of my writing because I don't know them and they're not part of my cultural world or social world. And all of that is really important. I privilege my Yamaji family because that is what I'm placed here to do. That's a legacy my mum and dad left me.
And going back to the native welfare files and the data sovereignty, which is the sort of theme that we've been circling throughout this, about possessing your own data, yes, but apart from this being, the rightful ownership of the data, is it and is your writing also about bearing witness?
Talk to me a little bit more about what that means.
Well, bearing witness to what has been done to your people, and what is being done to your people, and what that means.
Yeah, I guess you can say that then. You go through all the processes, but I went through that as a angry young woman, young girl. I got angry when learning a lot of things in Canberra from files. I've been through all of that. Now I can analyze things and make me think on why this has happened or what has happened to tell the true story of my family.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
For sharing all that, poems and experiences and thoughts and ideas and insights on the theme. Well, it wasn't just the theme of Aboriginal female Indigenous data sovereignty, but related themes. It's been fascinating. Details of Charmaine's books and where to get them will be posted with this podcast, so please look out for them. Poets Corner will return in a month or so with Kevin Brophy reading poems and talking on the theme of out of place. See you then.